Hey, true crime fans. Dr. Cassidy here with Composition of a Killer. So glad you are joining me today. We're going to be talking about Harold Shipman from the UK. And as always, before we get into the story of Harold Shipman, just to note that nothing that we discussed in this podcast is meant to diagnose anyone. I do have my professional opinion about things, but it's my professional opinion and I am allowed to have that. So just like you're allowed to have yours for sure. Okay, so Harold Shipman, he was born in 1946 and he died in 2004. He's really an anomaly. Of all of the cases that I've covered, of all of the childhoods that we've talked about, his was very uneventful. As a matter of fact, what was really intriguing to me about it was, he had working class parents. They were devout Methodists, so they did have a religious resource, something in their life that held them to a standard, which is something you don't see in other serial killers. They don't have that kind of support in their home life. He was a very accomplished rugby player in youth leagues, and I'm not sure how all the school works in the UK, but he passed his 11 plus in 1957, moving to High Pavement Grammar School in Nottingham, which he left in 1964. He excelled as a distance runner and in his final year at school served as vice captain of the athletics team. He was particularly close to his mother, who died of lung cancer when he was 17. Her death came in a manner similar to what later became Shipman's own modus operandi. In the later stages of her disease, she had morphine administered at home by a doctor. Shipman witnessed his mother's pain subside despite her terminal condition until her death on the 21st of June, 1963. 3 years later, in 1966, he married Primrose May Oxtoby. I'm not sure how you pronounce that either. The couple had 4 children, and Shipman studied medicine at Leeds School of Medicine, University of Leeds, graduating in 1970. So he was educated, had it's seemingly good home life just because they had 4 children. There's no record that I have found that his marriage wasn't good or that there was anything weird about it or bad. So by all accounts, he seemed to have a very normal, enjoyable childhood as well as a prosperous adulthood. He began working at Pontefract General Infirmary in Pontefract, West Riding of Yorkshire, and in 1974 took his first position as a general practitioner at the Abraham Ormerod Medical Center in Todmorden. The following year, Shipman was caught forging prescriptions of pethidine for his own use. And I meant to look that up. I don't know what pethidine is, but that's interesting. I wonder if that's some sort of, I'm assuming it's a narcotic, but pethidine. It is a narcotic. High risk for addiction and dependence, can cause respiratory distress and death when taken in high doses or when combined with other alcohol or other substances, illicit drugs such as heroin or cocaine. And it says pethidine is similar to Demerol. Okay, so he was taking Demerol, which is a fairly high-powered drug. He was fined 600 pounds and briefly attended a drug rehabilitation clinic in New York. He worked as a GP at Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde, Great Manchester in 1977. So, despite that hiccup of having to go to rehab for his drug use, looks like he overcame that. Looks like he overcame that and continued to be, successful in his career. Shipman continued working as a GP in Hyde throughout the 1980s and established his own surgery at 21 Market Street in 1993. It just blows my mind sometimes when we're talking about these people in real time. This was in 1993. I mean, it's not that long ago. It's 30 years ago. And I guess when you're younger, that seems like an eternity. But as someone who's certainly middle-aged, that was not that long ago. So it's just crazy to think that these people were operating during a time in which we are alive. I often think about serial killers in the past tense, but that's just simply not true. When he opened up the surgery at 21 Market Street, he became a respected member of the community. In 1983, he was interviewed in an edition of the Granada Television Current Affairs documentary, World in Action, on how the mentally ill should be treated in the community. A year after his conviction on charges of murder, the interview was rebroadcast with Tonight with Trevor McDonald, which, of course, is probably a BBC show. So it first got on the radar in March of 1998 by Dr. Linda Reynolds of the Brooks Surgery in Hyde, who expressed concerns to John Pollard, the coroner for the South Manchester district, about the high death rate among Shipman's patients. In particular, she was concerned about the large number of cremation forms for elderly women that he had asked to have countersigned. Police were unable to find sufficient evidence to bring charges and closed the investigation on 17th of April. The Shipman inquiry later blamed Greater Manchester Police for assigning inexperienced officers to the case. After the investigation was closed, Shipman killed 3 more people. A few months later, in August, a taxi driver, John Shaw, told the police that he suspected Shipman of murdering 21 patients. Shaw became suspicious as many of the elderly customers he took to the hospital, while seemingly in good health, died in Shipman's care. So you see, in that hospital setting, you see that, Lucy that we talked about a few weeks ago. What was it, Ledbetter? Lucy was the nurse who just recently was convicted of killing babies. She was a baby killer. Let's see. Yeah, Letby. Lucy Letby. Letby. We talked about her a few weeks ago. And much like her experience, someone was paying attention and putting into place the unusual number of cremation forms that he was submitting. Evidently, that was very unusual. And thank God she did notice that. But Shipman's last victim was Kathleen Grundy, a former mayor of Hyde, who was found dead at her home on June 24th of 98. He was the last person to see her alive, and he later signed her death certificate, recording the cause of death as old age. Grundy's daughter, solicitor Angela Woodruff, became concerned when fellow solicitor Brian Burgess informed her that a will had been made, apparently by her mother, with doubts about its authenticity. The will excluded Woodruff and her children, but left £386,000 to Shipman. At Burgess's urging, Woodruff went to the police, who began an investigation. Grundy's body was exhumed and found to contain traces of diomorphine, which is heroin. often used for pain control in terminal cancer patients. Shipman claimed that Grundy had been an addict and showed them comments he had written to that effect in his computerized medical journal. However, police examination of his computer showed that the entries were written after her death. Big surprise, right? Trying to cover his tracks, basically. Shipman was arrested on September 7th of 1998 and was found to own a Brother typewriter of the type used to make the forged will. Prescription for Murder, a 2000 book by journalists Brian Whittle and Gene Ritchie, suggested that Shipman forged the will either because he wanted to be caught because his life was out of control, or because he planned to retire at 55 and leave the UK. The police investigated other deaths Shipman had certified and investigated 15 specimen cases. They discovered a pattern of his administering lethal doses of diamorphine, signing patients' death certificates, and then falsifying medical records to indicate that they had been in poor health. In 2003, David Spiegelhalter suggested that statistical monitoring could have led to an alarm being raised at the end of 1996 when there were 67 excess deaths in females aged over 65 years compared with 119 by 1998. That is a tremendous 2 years. That's a tremendous statistical increase. So, yes, I agree with David Spiegelhalter. You could certainly just look at the statistics of that situation and immediately question the validity of the information. And I would certainly think that also, I would have thought that the family members might have been more suspicious. Especially, even if 65 is not old. Not to me. He's known as killing the elderly. 65 is not elderly. Now, it could be if you have really bad health and you are, your health is bad, so you're not particularly, I don't know how to say it. Like maybe you're 65, but you really act like your body has aged like it's 85. You just aren't healthy, and that has increased your morbidity rate. So I think I would be interested to see that, just because he makes a great point. If the statistical monitoring had been more effective or even in existence, maybe he would have been caught sooner, right? It's always interesting to find, and I've not had too many that mention things like this, but sometimes after cases like this, especially big cases that are national, and they get all kinds of information, and they draw a lot of interest, you have policies that get changed in departments. You have sometimes laws are created or changed. There's all kinds of situations where the victims' families would speak out against what happened, and after an inquiry, major things were changed. There's always an internal investigation before things like this are done. But unfortunately, that's kind of similar to education. We don't ever know in education when things are going to change, because things change all the time, every day. No one day is like any other. There's always something different. And that's just because you're dealing with typically 20 different personalities. So your day can be affected by someone else, especially a student in your class, very easily. I would imagine it's very similar in the hospital, where, there are certainly many things that never change, like the way they do, or not never, but not often. They don't change often. But as many pieces of research are out there in that body